You're listening to All About Girls of Color podcast, a space dedicated to creating environments that allow girls to thrive. We explore issues and solutions that focus on removing obstacles so the natural joy and genius of girls can bloom. Join us as we dive into conversations all about girls of color and the women they become.
I'm Tanisa Kunright, the founder and executive director of Detour Empowers and the Fancy Teen Girls Leadership Academy.
I'm Gabriela Delgado, an educator and principal consultant for Saving Our Starfish.
And I'm Janedra Sykes, an equity, diversity, and inclusion certified organizational development coach and consultant and a partner in Arboreta Group.
Disclaimer. Our intention is to bring our whole selves to the conversations by bringing our professional and personal selves to each episode. Any views or opinions on the podcast are personal and belong solely to the creators and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the creators may or may not have been associated with in a professional or personal capacity unless explicitly stated.
Welcome to another episode of All About Girls of Color. I am happy to introduce our guest today, Dr. Johanna MoyaFábregas, who's with the Con Mi Madre program based in Austin, Texas. So, Johanna, why don't, before we jump in and pick your brain with a lot of questions, share a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get started.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. So I am, right now I work as the executive director for Con Mi Madre here in Austin. A little bit about me. I'm originally from Cuba. I was born in Cuba, Cuban mom, Chilean dad, and grew up throughout Latin America during all of the dictatorship waves of the 80s and moved to the States as a 14-year-old as an immigrant. And my family settled in Madison, Wisconsin. And that's where I went to high school and college, and eventually went off to Indiana University to do a Ph.D. in history, focused on Latin American history, and that's what I taught and did research on for a while. And, all of that process of studying history and going to college, I think a lot of that was a search for understanding my background, my identity, my people, where I came from, and have come full circle now to work for an organization that provides support to Latina girls, primarily Latinas, but it's open to all on that journey of achieving post-secondary education and to work with them and the whole family. So that's where I'm at now. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, a mother, a daughter of a mom that I take care of, and I'm based here in Austin.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know we've had a brief chance to connect previously, and I shared with my friends here how I was I was intrigued by your program because of the unique model that you have. And so maybe we can pick it up from there, is just maybe for our listeners, what is Con Mi Madre all about? What do you do? What does it look like?
Yeah. And I'll start by giving you a little bit of the story of how we came to be. So we are a nonprofit that started out as a project of the Junior League in Austin in '92. Way back, before it was Con Mi Madre, it was called the Hispanic Mother-Daughter Program. And the idea for that program, it came out of, in response to a statistic that was pretty sad, that at the time, a Latina girl from a low-income family had less than 1% chance of making it to college, of graduating from college. So the idea behind the program was to work, from culturally relevant and affirming perspective with not just the student, but with the moms, and to start early during the 6th grade and follow those students. We have a curriculum developed in-house, and we follow them all the way through high school graduation, and then eventually we added a college program. So up to about 2007, we were that program, and then we became a nonprofit. And Con Mi Madre, which means with my mother in Spanish, is because we work it's a dual generation model. We work with both the moms and the daughters. And Madre is an acronym that means mothers and daughters raising expectations. And that's the program we recruit. Right now, we recruit in both in the 6th grade and the 9th grade. We have a staff comprised of mostly social work background, graduates who go into the schools. We have partnerships with different school districts, and then they open the doors for us to be in particular, like very specific schools that they assign, to us. And we go into the schools, meet with the students, with the cohort, like every month, and implement the curriculum, which changes depending on where they are. A sixth grader, an eighth grader will be different. And the curriculum addresses issues around, questions around identity, who I am, where I'm going, setting goals. Coming from a low income myself and being an immigrant and the first in my family to graduate from college, I know firsthand how difficult that process is, and how sometimes if you're in a family of limited means, even the ability to dream can be curtailed. I mean, kids are very smart, and they're like, well, if my parents can't afford that, I'm not even going to fathom the idea of going there, or, of like studying this one thing, or thinking of what my future is going to be like. So we are firm believers of working from the inside out. So we start by setting goals and conveying this idea that, everything is attainable. You just have to dream it, visualize it, and then we will make sure to connect you with the resources to make sure that those goals happen.
You're speaking our language.
Yeah. I love it. So can you talk about the mother's perspective? We've heard about the kind of life cycle of the program for the girls, but what does it look like for the moms to be involved?
Oh, yes. So I described part of the program only. So there's part of the program, I mean, even to finish with the girls, part of the program, it's what we do inside of the schools, but we also have outside of the schools program conferences. So we do 2 conferences a year, 2 college trips. And on all of those out of school events and conferences, we bring the moms as well. And the moms are part of that process. So they're targeted. For instance, in December, every year we have what we call a balanced living conference, where we look at physical, mental, and financial health. And all the conferences are bilingual, and they're directed to both daughters and moms, so that they can, explore like these different areas of how to achieve a more balanced life. Because if we're going to focus on education, we have to look at the whole person and the whole family. We also have a parent program where it's specifically for the moms, and it includes a networking group called Café Entre Madres, where they meet up. And it's really interesting because prior to the pandemic, I remember we sometimes struggle with people showing up on time or showing up, because Austin, just getting around Austin, it's a pain. Not as bad as LA, but we're getting there. And once people figure out how to use Zoom and how to use online tools, for the moms, surprisingly, because before the pandemic, this wouldn't have never happened. They became more comfortable, and it became the preferred method, because then they can manage being at home or, picking up kids from school. And so we have a very active group of moms that come together to talk about whatever subject they deem important at that time, and we moderate it. And we also have, in addition to that, for the parents, an education series, which is focused on topics that have been, selected and brought up by the moms. So we bring, speakers from the community. For instance, it could be around taxes, how do taxes work, or it could be around financial education, or, LGBTQ plus, like moms of LGBTQ plus students, and they're trying to navigate that terrain that's new for them, and they want to support their kids, and they bring that up to us. So we bring, someone who's an expert in the subject and can talk and orient the moms about how to, best support their kids. So they bring this list of topics, and we find the people who are experts who can come talk to them about it. And so we offer that as well. And also just we have a lot of contacts in the community and a lot of partnerships. So even though we're not a wraparound services organization, we do connect our families with, different services as the need arises. So, for instance, we had a horrible ice storm here. It's going to be 2 years now. And it was, Texas was not prepared for that. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard, but like we
Yeah.
lost electricity. I mean, I lost electricity here for about a week.
Oh, wow.
It was really, really bad. And we turned to just calling every family. We divided the numbers, 4 numbers, called them, and managed to get help to pay bills or medical help or whatever, food, whatever was needed. So we're really a big community with the moms and the students, and we get to know the whole family. When our students graduate and go through those milestones, or going into high school or into college, graduating from college, we celebrate them with a big graduation reception where we invite the whole family, and it's in a big space with music, food, and they also get to apply for scholarships for college, for those going into college and those persisting in college, that we're able to obtain from community partners, and so we can support them in that way as well. So it really feels like this really big extended family.
That's really cool. I have lots of questions, but my what I want to ask you is, although I got to say I've been to Austin before, and that is a great food town.
It is.
I did not have a bad meal when I was there, and I think fondly of Austin often. All right, after saying that, I love your acronym about expectations, and I'm wondering if mothers' expectations, what kind of adjustments are needed for that? And I'm kind of thinking of this study that we came across doing this podcast they did a study of Latina girls and Black girls, and they talked about how much responsibility that they had in the home. Taking care of siblings and cooking and cleaning, and there was a lot of work. And I was just thinking about that in balance to the academics that you needed time to do. I mean, did you ever have to do any work around those expectations as far as family roles?
Yeah. I think we've addressed that by, it's kind of addressing that becomes a byproduct of engaging the mom. So when you're engaging the mom from an early stage, and from the 6th grade, and they become familiar with what first the advantage of going to college, the advantage of having a post-secondary degree and what that can do for your finances, not just for your student, but for the whole family, how they can help you down the line. I think that's one of the big, the first realizations for those who are not already bought into that process. We have people that come to us, because it's something fun for their daughters, because they want, and along the way they realize, oh my gosh, there's so much value in achieving a college education, and then they're on board. But there are others who see that from the beginning and they don't know how, but they know that will help them along the way. When it comes to the responsibilities of the home, I think because the moms are involved every step of the way in understanding the process of preparing for and going to college and the benefit, that becomes easier to manage, because this is not like an after school program where they send their daughters and somebody else works with them, or their daughters went off to a program in the summer and they just get to hear from them what happened. They're involved. Like when we go to a college trip, we have a Spanish, for instance, a Spanish speaking person in the school. We make sure that we get somebody in the tour, not just to show the buildings, but to sit with the mom and answer questions about time required, like how much time it takes, finances, debt, college life, getting ready for that. So there is a clear grasp of what that process feels like. So can you imagine, like, if a mom started a Con Mi Madre with her student in the 6th grade, and we do 2 college trips per year, by the time they get to be a senior in high school,
They're experts.
they will have visited multiple universities, talked to a lot of people at those schools, talked to us, over here in the parent program, where we also address, the needs, the expectations, identity, all of those things are discussed. So it's I would say a very organic process of where it doesn't come up as, oh, this is a big issue, because they're slowly, are involved in the whole journey and in understanding. And as a result, we've had also some moms who, once that process of going to school is demystified, and they're like, oh, wait, it's not so daunting as I thought.
Right.
Why can I do it?
Yeah. That's so cool.
So it's really that still makes me emotional, to talk about that, because talking to moms and that have come to talk to panels for some of the conferences we do, or orientation, about what that process was like for them and how they better understood their daughters once they were going through college themselves, and sharing that with other moms creates that understanding. So we're addressing that from a lot of different angles.
Yeah, I really just want to celebrate that and lift that up, because you hear a lot of times in communities of color, oh, the parents aren't interested. They're not engaged. How do we engage the parents? And you've given a great example and shed light to the fact that the parents need to go through their own preparation process in addition to the students. You know what I mean? Because a lot of parents keep their students from taking advantage of certain opportunities because they think that they can't afford it, or it's not accessible, or that's not the environment for you. But exposing them to these opportunities, to these environments, so that they can understand more about the opportunities that their children have is definitely important. And like you said, lends itself to the relationship with the mother and daughter, because that is something that's, can be estranged during the teen years.
Can be.
That's true. And, there is sometimes, and I experienced this as a student, I experienced this as a professor when I taught students of color specifically, or first generation students of color, and they would come and say, well, my mom really doesn't know much about this process, or, but I noticed, and not just in my own case, but in those that I worked with, the importance of having that strong emotional support, whether the parent has or has not been to college, whether they understand the process and know it or not. The students that have that emotional bond and that support tend to be a lot healthier going through that process and do better. And now there's research, that shows that, right? That parent bond is not just important while you're, in elementary, middle school, and high school, but it's important beyond. Even though if you're legally an adult and independent, you're still emotionally connected to your family. And for families of color, we see that, being even more so, and that expectation of being connected. So we not only communicate that to the parents, but we also talk to the students about the importance of bringing their family into the process, of including their moms. Because sometimes, teenagers, I was there, it's like, no sabes nada, like, you don't know anything, mom, like, don't worry, I'm doing this, I know it all, right? I'm here, like, navigating the process. But when you have somebody that you trust, like a coordinator, somebody who's young, who's been working with you, talk to you about the importance of bringing your family in and how that worked for them, then suddenly, our students pay more attention. I mean, it's like kids. I'm a parent too. I can say something to my kids, very wise and valid, but if somebody else that they trust says that, they're like, oh,
they
That must be
listen.
true.
Yeah.
That must be true. I love that I'm learning and hearing about these challenged, well-ingrained gender norms that we tend to have in the Latino community. And so to have moms and dads and uncles and tias and grandmas that can really lift up a young woman is just it's just so heartwarming on a lot of different levels. Oftentimes we still, although there have been shifts, recently in the Latino culture, and I'm kind of generalizing, but we tend to, back to Janedra's point, is really kind of pigeonhole the role of that woman. And so to have moms who maybe themselves didn't have that same opportunity, or someone didn't open the door for them, maybe the fact that they're doing that and advocating for their daughter, and then it becomes a ripple effect, right? To say you're opening her mind and her eyes to all these beautiful, amazing things that perhaps were not presented to you because of the community you grew up in, or the norms that were established for you that you perhaps couldn't find a way around. And so I just would love your thoughts and feedback around that, and what you have encountered maybe when there is some curiosities or wonderings, or maybe even some apprehension, to encourage the ongoing growth and education, and perhaps even leaving the home before she's married.
And I would say in some cultures it's hostility that the family might have, like,
Why are you leaving?
Why are you leaving?
Where are you going?
Yeah.
And I think it's just harder on that journey for young girls than it has been historically for young men. So I would just love your thoughts on that, or what you've seen in your program.
I think, we definitely talk about that both with the moms and the daughters, separately and together.
Yeah.
We have them both as an audience. And I think there's apprehension. We tend to find a lot of apprehension about letting their daughters go off to college out of state or out of the city, farther out. And that's why we take them on the trips, to kind of appease that. But there's also the conversation with the students that, from a more liberating perspective, like, hey, you're growing up, your parents, we're doing everything we can so that they learn the process, and they might still be a little apprehensive, but they're not going to stop loving you. And they're not going to, because if they've supported you all the way to this point and they're just a little uncomfortable, they'll come around. And I experienced that with students. I taught high school also for a little bit, with some students who were like, oh, miss, I want to go away, but I don't know, but my mom, but she's supportive of college. And those same students were the ones that when college got really tough and they felt like they were the only one there and like that they wanted to quit, their moms who had said, no, I don't want you to go far away, were the ones like, miss, you better finish. You didn't go all the way out there to, like I had a student in Vermont. You didn't go all the way out there to Vermont to leave after your freshman year. You can do this. Let's find you help. And so you see a lot of those examples where, the parents are also there. I always tell them there's no parent who's doing this because they don't want the best for their kids. They want the best for their kids. But there are also sometimes, there's limitations in how they grew up, in their own experience. So it's important to give them an opportunity to overcome that as well.
Yeah.
And then the other angle from which, at least I talk about it with the students, and I know we do this with our programs, is thinking about the generational impact. Thinking about, and walking them through that reflection that, and telling the student right now it's hard, but if you go off to school and, you're in a better financial situation, you're going to be in a better position to help your parents down the line. And I say that because I experienced that as a student, as a graduate student. I remember, I went off to do a Ph.D. in history, which I couldn't have picked the longest career. And I remember a lot of the people who were there with me, they had their families had savings and trust funds, and I didn't. And my parents they had a small business. They didn't have insurance because they couldn't afford the insurance at the time. So I was always like one foot at home, which was 7 hours away, and one foot in grad school. And I remember going home to read their mail, to help them with taxes, to learn that so I could help them. And so I know for a fact that a lot of our students go through that sometimes. But when you have like the vision ahead of you and you're like, this is tough now and I'm doing this, but down the line, I'm doing this not just for me, but I'm also doing this for my family, because I will be in a better place to help them out and support them when they need me. Then it shifts. And I think culturally, specifically for Latinas, that's the experience I can speak from. When sometimes, we're raised with a lot of guilt, a lot of sense
And
of
Catholic guilt.
responsibility. And I think guilt is like, comes with the chromosomes. Like it's in there. And you feel, because I remember feeling terribly guilty for getting to do all these really cool things while my parents, had to work really hard. They had really hard. They had a food truck, a business, and I wasn't there physically to help them and to, be available. And what kept me going, I remember it was my dad who always said, no, look ahead. Like, you will be in a better place, down the line, and it helps everybody, not just the generation that came before you, your family, but it's also going to help your future generation, and they're not going to be in the same situation. So I think bringing that perspective with students also helps, because it helps you think about the impact of the work that you're doing as just by being a student and being successful and opening doors for yourself. How it's not only good for you, but it's good for the people that precede you and those who come after you.
And I got a kind of weird question that I want to ask, because I know is, the family support. I know in the Black community, when you're at the graduation ceremony and you're walking across stage and, the chancellor, the dean says, save all your applause to everybody's. And Black people completely ignore that, right? I mean, that kid is crossing. They got air horns. They got flags.
Because we are all graduating.
We're all graduating. Does the Latinx community do that too? That's my question.
It is totally the same.
Yeah.
I think because,
We don't follow direction either with that.
That's why we also hold our graduation ceremony, where they bring their caps and gowns and their cords and everything. And we award scholarships, we recognize them, we have music, because I always say this is a collective effort.
Yes.
This is not just the student, because how many sacrifices that whole family had to make so that student could walk the stage. How many tears, how much work. So it's like, and I come from a half Caribbean family. The Chilean one is not so loud, but the Caribbean.
The Caribbean side makes up for the quiet side.
Yeah.
And a party, and you had to have music and food.
Yeah.
Everything.
Wow. Well, I'm struck by a couple things you've said, and I get a little teary-eyed myself. I appreciate you sharing the perspective of an immigrant, because what's often shared is not the love. What is often shared is you're not welcomed here, or it's not for you. And I just very much appreciate your voice for our, women and girls in the community, so that people in this country can know that it is a country founded on immigrants. And it's a beautiful journey and experience when you open your heart and your mind to remove those barriers so that everyone can thrive and be successful. So I'm a horrible, ugly crier, and it's hard for me to get my words out when I'm crying. But because hearing you, when we talk about representation matters, I feel like, because you're representing me right now, Johanna, and that just is so meaningful to me. And I hope it's meaningful to, our listeners and our viewers, that representation matters at all stages of life. And so for me to see you as this woman with her doctorate and accomplished credentials and doing this in the community, grassroots advocacy, that's what it's about. And to paint that picture accurately about the sacrifice that our parents make, to say, you think that they wanted to do those jobs? No, they're doing those jobs so that their kids can be successful, so that they have a better opportunity, right? And so I just appreciate that true narrative being shared about what it is like to come into this country not feeling like you can figure it out, but that you've got that love and support. And if you don't have the most of resources, that doesn't stop you, and it's because of the love of the family that in your community that you pull together. So I very much just am humbled in the work that you do and continue to do. So I apologize for the
No apologies.
Yes, no apology needed.
No, we just need to get some Kleenex up in
Right.
this up in this place.
Not single Kleenex, but that's
I don't know if you could separate it like this, but I'm wondering if you could put percentages on this. Because I think, and I'm not the expert in this area, these two are, but there's so much of an emphasis in the larger culture on the academic piece, the A through G's, all that stuff. And I think, I know that's really important. But if you had to do the percentages of that hardcore academic piece versus, like, for lack of a better term, like the soft stuff that you help with, like the family relationships, the exposure.
I think, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's soft stuff that's internal and external.
Yeah.
Because you have an internal piece that is your resilience, your responsibility, your outlook on life, your attitude, the way that you deal with things, see things, and the way that you see yourself, which is the most important, right? Yeah. And then those quote unquote soft skills, can you communicate with people? Do you have conflict resolution? Do you have healthy relationships? Like how you're showing up externally. And then the academic piece.
So if you had to percentage it what do you think the math is on that?
For me or Joanna?
No, well, since you interrupted.
I know, because I was passionate about that thing.
Yeah. You asked it first, then Joanna.
I'm spending a lot of time on internal because that's the foundation for me. So I'm spending at least half the time on let's get your head right, because if that's not right, nothing else matters. You know what I mean? So I would say for me, 50% internal and then a 25% academic, 25%, soft skills, people skills.
I would have to agree with that. And it's interesting because a lot of people, like for us with our program, when they hear about Con Mi Madre and they hear about the graduation from high school, from college focus, they think it's an academic program or that it's tutoring. And because we do track those outcomes and they're really high. I mean, we have about 98% of our students graduating and 93% persistent in college and all of that, but not because we're providing academic support, because we're spending the bulk of our time on that part that you just mentioned, on the inside out. So what we've been calling it, like the last, couple of years, especially during the pandemic, right? There was a lot of focus. Now everyone sees that mental health.
Right.
Right. Finally.
Welcome.
Now it's like, thank you, finally, right? It's like, you don't have to convince somebody, oh, this is worth, looking at. But with our program, we started calling it like a culturally intelligent program and focus on the cultural IQ in the way that we do things. And what I mean by that is like we are, first of all, to get anywhere with academic achievement, you have to look at the whole individual and work on that self-esteem and address what they bring to the table and the worth that has. Because, sadly, for many communities of color, the message, and it's a very, colonized world, and the message that we have been constantly hearing is that to succeed, you check, in this box over here, who you are, your struggles, your identity, because that's shameful, and you adopt this mainstream, whatever that mainstream might be at that historical time. Right?
White supremacy.
White supremacist culture. I'll say it. White supremacist culture that requires systemic change.
That's the experience that many of us had going through an education system to a work system. So what we do is we start by talking about that with our students, by talking about their histories, who they are, their families, and seeing not as a detriment, but as an asset. Like that actually puts you ahead. It gives you an advantage because not only do you have, like you were saying, the resilience and the know-how to navigate multiple cultures, multiple scenarios, to hustle, financially. You do all these things that somebody without your experience doesn't have. So once you acknowledge and see how much worth you have based on who you are, just who you are and what you've lived through and what your family has lived through, then you show up, with a different perspective to set goals, to go after your own, success, whatever that means to you, and to define that. So I agree. It has to be at least 50% of that internal work in order to move towards these goals, because we don't want a society full of women of color who have degrees and careers but are not happy and living somebody else's dreams and somebody else's standards. We want a society of women who will change the rules of the game and will be successful and will bring the whole selves with them and their families, right?
So do you address directly the challenge of going to college in a primarily white institution? And I say that, when you mentioned your girl that went to Vermont. I just saw her in a face of like blonde hair, blue eyes, and that as far as the eye could see, right? Which is bias on my part. I'm sure there's some black and brown people in Vermont. Sorry, Vermont, if anyone's listening there. But, it was a shock to my system, going into, I went my freshman and sophomore year in Oregon, and from being from Southern Cal, and that was a shock to my system. So do you deal directly with that, or is it just...
Yeah, what is the preparation? I know my youngest foster sister, she was the one who was a Gates Scholar and got a full ride to Syracuse. And I always tell the story, the first time she visited the campus, we were dropping her off so she could start that semester at school. And she often told stories about kids that didn't come back after break.
Wow.
Like the whole dorm and stuff, they left everything. They just didn't have the mental capacity to continue. And it was very difficult for her. But what I noticed for her was that she connected early with like her roommate. And like she always had like one or two solid people that she could connect with amongst the whole campus of, people that she was trying to get to know.
That's key. I mean, we do talk about that while they're in high school specifically, part of our curriculum in high school, that comes up. But we also talk about that we have a college and career fair every year, and we have panels. We have panels of students who have gone through that, moms who have supported their students through that process. And so they get to ask questions, and we prompt them to talk about these very real issues, and so that we could focus on, validating that and also understanding, okay, what did they do? What helped them navigate that process?
Right.
And then we have a college program as well, and that one is virtual. So that one is, we bring in, subject expert matter on different topics to help them navigate the experience of being in college. So how to seek community, how to talk to a professor. What does the research say about a student of color in that situation? Because when you hear that, you're like, oh, it's not just me.
Right. You need a support group.
That I'm not working hard enough, that I can't do it. So we bring them together virtually to talk about all these things while they're in college. And we also provide our students with one-on-one support. So individual check-ins with our college success coordinator to ensure that they have somebody that they can reach out to when things get tough, because at some point they will get tough, and you need that lifeline of support to be there for you. But it's very real, though. It's very real. I have yet to meet a student of color who's gone to a predominantly white institution and has not had a very difficult time. I've yet to meet one.
And the work, right, that needs to be done with the faculty, who also probably, as a majority, do not represent students of color. And so to know that the journey is a little bit different. And, that's why I love that you are talking about helping them develop a support system, because if your family is not able to provide other than like emotional support and will be your cheerleader, but sometimes you do need someone that has been in that same journey to say, I get it, and here's what helped, in that situation. Or, there's such a thing as imposter syndrome. You may be encountering something along those lines, right? And I think creating those spaces for young people as they're navigating that new chapter of their life is so important. But equally as important is that the faculty understand and that they themselves have done some of their own work to say, what types of experiences are you creating in your teaching and in your learning spaces that create a sense of welcoming and belonging, or do they not, for our students? And so traditionally, when I've interacted with higher ed folks, and even when I taught briefly at higher ed, I thought, it didn't really look like me. And so I think that's something that those systems have to intentionally do. And I think some, at least in California, I know that there's that move, but I don't know nationally what that looks like. I don't have the statistics, but I want to assume that most of that is still primarily white men who are in those tenured faculty positions. And so again, how does that impact the people that are in their learning spaces? And so what can we begin to do to just start to shift that, to say, perhaps it's encouraging our own students of color to say, you can change that narrative by being in that space, right? So role modeling what that looks like to,
while saying this is hard,
right.
you're not crazy, this is hard. Yeah.
Yes, for our students, for students in general, that understanding that they're going into a space that it's supposed to be, and I always say supposed to be like a university, is like supposed to be a multicultural, multinational, like it's supposed to be a very heterogeneous space that you're not just gaining from that experience, but you are a big part of what it's going into the experience of others there. So, you're contributing. And I bring that up because I always bring this up when I talk about this, because oftentimes our students go into those spaces thinking, I'm not enough, and I'm not good enough. And it starts even from writing the college essays. Like, hey, I got good grades, and I'm the valedictorian, and I have all these things, and feeling like they have to check these boxes to prove their worth, but still writing it from a perspective of, I'm amazing because I've done these things and I got good grades and I did volunteer, and you please let me in. And when I would read essays from students like that and kind of guide them through that process, I'd be like, no, you need to do this again. And think about, you're going into a university. Where does that word come from? Universal. And you are part of that. You're making the experience of others. So think about your life and what you're adding to the mix. That has a lot of value, because there are people there who've never seen a person like you,
right,
who've never had the great opportunity to come across someone like you and learn from their experience. So what you're bringing is not just your mind, your academic mind, you're bringing your whole life experience, which matters. So there's that piece. And then from the college and faculty side, and I have a lot of friends in academia because that's where I spent a lot of time, there is still a struggle, to change those spaces. And some universities are more welcoming than others and more willing to do that work. There are others who don't want to let go of that power of how things have been structured forever, and are afraid of that change. However, whether they want to see that change coming and accept it and do something about it or not, it's coming.
We're here.
I always say our future looks like what's in front of me in the screen. That's what our future looks like. So it really, I always think, rather than working against the current and trying to, convince people who are really set in their ways about how to do things differently, let's work with the people who have the potential to make that change, which is our youth, and to occupy those spaces, in a way that it's inclusive and that opens and paves the way for others. Because those people are not going to be in those roles forever.
They're not going to be there forever.
Who are the people graduating? It's mostly women right now. And there's a lot of women. I mean, those numbers have changed. I can't remember the latest statistic, but they've changed a lot. So it's going to look like us.
Yeah, I got checked last week by another diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant talking about the imposter syndrome, right? So she told me, and I've been thinking about this for the last week. No, it's not the imposter syndrome. They don't want you there, right? Right. So you're not, so once you accept that, it's like, she said, I think the imposter syndrome is like blaming the victim. No, you're not welcome there in the space that you're in. And once you accept that, you transcend it. Like, yeah, you don't want me here, but I'm here.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I ain't going anywhere because I'm entitled to be here.
Right.
Right? And I've just really been thinking about that, that sense we have of women of color of not feeling like we belong in certain places or we're welcomed in certain places is because we're not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that actually, you spoke to this earlier, Johanna, about having parents come in and understand the process and this and exposing them to these same experiences, because oftentimes if they haven't had the same journey in school that their children have, they themselves as adults don't feel like those, even at the K-12 level, that those spaces are welcoming and accepting of them as parents, because there's a lot of judgment or what do you mean you don't have, this equipment at home? What do you mean they're not in a drone class? And so there's this, I don't know if I should even go or have my child go because that isn't for me and I haven't been made to feel welcome. And so I know for us at a school level is really trying to truly say, no, what does it look like when you authentically mean that you do want to invite people? You can't just say, oh, we love all and we welcome everybody. It's like, no, but how are you practicing that? And
what's your behavior?
Yeah, your behavior is actually very telling, much more than just a policy that you might have, in the front office.
What advocates do you have for those parents and people who can facilitate those conversations, who can open doors for them? It's so important. I remember, my high school experience. There were 2,000 students and maybe 40 Latinos on paper. 40 Latinos, self-acknowledged as Latinos, maybe 10. But I remember, my parents didn't speak English, and my dad, and he was always very brave and pushed to open doors for me. Showing up to the school when they wouldn't let me take biology because they wanted me to take home ec class. And him saying, well, the teacher might not speak Spanish, but you at least have a Spanish teacher here. Somebody can translate for me. So I'm not leaving. Somebody translates because this is important. But, having, in that case, he was brave and he did that and didn't feel intimidated. But there are many parents who, feel very intimidated and very afraid of going into that space. And so having someone who can not just talk to you about your rights and how your input matters and, why you should be there, but also having someone internally in those schools who will open those doors for you, who will walk with you through that process. It's so important. The same for universities, including parents. How do you make the experience of students of color meaningful, especially low-income students of color, that the parents can afford to come to homecoming games and travel for this and get a hotel, and how do you include them in that process?
Yeah,
because if you're including the parent, you're telling the student that they matter.
Yeah,
that
definitely.
They matter just the same as everybody else. But if you're not creating a space where they can participate, then what are you saying? And I wanted to just do a quick plug-in that we're doing here in Austin. So I'm part of this other group, Central Texas College Attainment Network. And it's one of the things that, I'm part of their policy committee, but one of the things that we recently did we were able to get consultants to work with us, to work with 5 different institutions in the city, around the city, who are part of this collaborative group, and talk about how they were creating a favorable climate
Ooh.
in the universities. Because there was a lot of talk about policy. Oh, the policies and at the state level, because we're here in Austin, and the legislators here and all of that. But what is happening internally to make a favorable climate for students, for faculty, so that the students will thrive there, recognizing that that is a big part of their experience, that they encounter, right?
And my thought is that could translate into policy, right?
It can, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That
how
brings
you
that awareness.
how you onboard
Yeah.
people, how you train your staff.
Yeah, how do you create even spaces for organizations for students of color?
Yeah.
What kind of support do you create for first generation college students?
What kind of space do you give?
To persist and to feel like they're part of a community. How do you recruit faculty of color and provide incentives so that they will want to stay there? I remember leaving a tenure track job, and I was the only the only woman and the only Latina the only, not woman in general, like Latina woman in the whole institution, and feeling extremely isolated.
Oh man, and lonely too.
Oh my gosh, this is where I'm supposed to be successful, but I don't feel that way. Like it feels lonely and rough. And people are nice, but that's not it. Something's missing. And I couldn't put that into words. And when you create those spaces, now there's a lot more talk about that, but creating those spaces that are welcoming, it's so important. We do have a role in demanding accountability, not as leaders of the community, but also as parents, as people who work with students. I mean, students can demand that of a school and voice it and say, hey, I'm choosing to go here and not here because you don't offer this. Think about the access we have to social media and sharing our thoughts. If you have it just going viral somewhere, where you have students talking about why they're choosing this place and not that place based on how others feel there, that puts pressure.
It does.
On
Sure
those
does.
institutions to start looking and say, oh, okay, maybe we need to put more funding here.
Yeah, and maybe we need to measure.
About this, right?
Yeah, maybe we need more than one
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Latina on the tenure track.
Right.
I mean,
my intention was not to come here to start the revolution.
No, let's do it. Let's do it.
But it kind of happened.
Well, Johanna, I have one last question. We tend to use the magic wand question quite a bit on the podcast. So my question for you is, if you had a magic wand or a crystal ball and you could see the future, where do you want Con Mi Madre to be in the next 10 to 15 years? What do you see?
Yes, so I would like Con Mi Madre to not just be in Austin or in Texas. We also have a chapter in Fort Worth. This is our main chapter. But I would like for a way to Con Mi Madre to exist throughout the country, and to have create this larger community of connected women of color, and to really open it up to not we work with Latinas, but to women of color in general, and we have been doing that, even though the name remains Con Mi Madre. Our students are not all Latinas, and to focus on defining success as a community and understanding the dynamics of each space that we inhabit, because what works for a community here is not the same that would work for another city in the US or another place. So it's being able to grow, but moving our focus, and this is I mean being a dreamer, because I am a dreamer, and not having to address some of the same issues that we've had with students in trying to talk about their worth, or where they come from, or where a lot of the effort has to go on that. But my dream is that we'll be in a place where our focus is going to be to exist to help students define their success, and define their success, because we are, I think, as a society, in a transition. Our education systems, as we've known them don't, they don't adapt to the times that we're living and how we're thinking. We have a very creative, youth right now that is not willing to do the things as we did them or assimilate. There is a lot of push for that. So my will is that we will be able to create a space and an environment where they can thrive and where they can define what they want the rules of the games to be, in their society. So that was a long-winded.
That sounds very revolutionary.
Yeah.
The revolutionary, she's back.
You asked me to dream.
Well, I have no doubt your program and with your leadership and the staff and volunteers and funders that you bring in have changed the trajectory for girls and for the women who are also involved as moms with your program. And I know dads and uncles participate as well. It's not just all moms. And so I picture these ripples that you start to generate that then can gain momentum and turn into something just extremely powerful and impactful. And so we wish you the best of luck moving forward. We know that we're going to stay connected. I feel like we're kindred spirits and we're connected to you now, and you're connected now to the All About Girls of Color community. And we look forward to hearing about all of the wonderful, amazing things that are going to happen in Austin, Texas. And maybe the next time we talk, you'll be in another state promoting a new chapter. Maybe it'll be in California. So on behalf of the All About Girls of Color, I'm Gabby.
I'm Tanisa.
I'm Janedra.
Thanks for listening. This podcast is made possible by the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. Additional sponsors include San Diego County Employees Charitable Organization. You can access all episodes and connect with us via email at allaboutgirlsofcolor.com.